outcomes can be right, process can still be wrong. Sometimes the final decision is correct, the policy works, the project is completed, the outcome looks successful, yet something still feels wrong. Not because of what was decided, but because how it was decided. In public life, outcomes alone are not enough. What matters just as much is the process behind them. Who was consulted, who was excluded, what was disclosed, what was quietly set aside, whether power was fairly exercised or merely efficiently. These differences are not minor details. They go to the heart of ethical governance, and this difference has a name: probity. And today's episode, we will explore what probity means and why it matters, the 5 pillars that sustain it, and the situations in which probity is most severely tested. Probity as a concept is often misunderstood. It is not simply about honesty. It is not only about avoiding corruption, and it is not a personal virtue in the narrow sense. In public life, probity refers to how power is exercised. It is concerned with the ethical quality of decision-making processes, not just the decision that is taken, but the manner in which it is reached. Probity requires that public decisions are made fairly, transparently, and without improper influence. It asks whether rules were applied consistently, whether discretion was exercised responsibly, and whether the process can withstand scrutiny. For this reason, probity is not primarily about intentions, it's about systems, safeguards, and records. The structures that protect the public interest when authority and discretion are used. In simple terms, probity exists when public power is exercised in a way that is explainable, defensible, and impartial. And probity fails not only when laws are broken, but when procedures are bent, shortcuts are taken, and conflicts of interest are concealed. This is why probity is best understood as the ethics of process, the standards that determine whether public authority has been exercised in the way that deserves trust. Probity matters because public power is different. Public institutions do not merely coordinate action, they allocate resources, they enforce rules, they make binding decisions. To do this effectively, they require legitimacy. That legitimacy comes not from law alone, it comes from trust. Trust is built when citizens can see that decisions are taken through fair, consistent, and transparent processes, even when outcomes do not favor them. When rules are applied equally, reasons are recorded, and discretion is constrained, people may disagree with the decision, but they are more likely to accept them. Citizens are more likely to accept public decisions, even difficult or unpopular ones, when they believe decision-making process was fair. Let's take an example. A government department awards a public contract. The project is delivered on time, costs remain within approved estimates. On paper, the outcome appears successful, but later it emerges that eligibility conditions were quietly altered, some bidders received information others did not, and conflicts of interest were not properly disclosed. The project may stand, the decision may even remain legally valid, but public trust is damaged. When trust erodes, legitimacy is weakened. Legitimacy exists when people accept the public authority of public institutions, not because they fear sanctions, but because they believe decisions were taken fairly and within proper bounds. When probity fails, decisions begin to look arbitrary, authority starts to feel self-serving, confidence in public institutions weakens. Power may still be exercised, but its moral justification is questioned. Failures of probity are not simply individual lapses, they're institutional failures. They increase skepticism, raise the cost of governance, and make effective public action harder over time. When processes are perceived as unfair or arbitrary, decisions face resistance, delay, and challenge even when they are technically sound. Time and resources are diverted to managing disputes, clarifying decisions, and restoring credibility. By contrast, Probity improves performance by reducing friction when rules are clear, reasons are recorded, and discretion is exercised transparently. Decisions move faster, face fewer challenges, and are easier to implement. This is why probity is not a procedural nicety, it's central to ethical governance, not because it guarantees perfect outcomes, but because it enables public institutions to function effectively and consistently over time. In public service, probity is not abstract. It rests on identifiable requirements, five pillars that together protect the integrity of decision making. These pillars translate ethical principles into practical safeguards for public decision. The first probity pillar is accountability. Public decisions must be answerable. There must be a clear record of who made the decision, under what authority, and on what basis. If responsibility cannot be traced, probity already begins to fail. After accountability, transparency is the second probity pillar. Decisions should not be hidden behind silence. Reasons matter, procedures matter, access to information matters. Transparency does not mean that everything is public. It means that nothing essential is concealed, especially facts that affect fairness or trust. Interestingly, we have an episode on transparency. Do watch that. Impartiality is the third probity pillar. Public power must not favor particular persons, groups, or interests. Rules must apply equally. Merit must outweigh influence. Once bias enters the process, whether real or perceived, fairness becomes a casualty. Confidentiality happens to be the fourth pillar. Not all information should be disclosed. Personal data, sensitive records, and strategic details require protection. Probity requires balance, openness without misuse, discretion without secrecy. Conflict of interest management forms the last pillar. Public officials inevitably have relationships and outside interests. Probity demands that these are identified, declared, and properly managed. Even the appearance of a conflict matters because public trust depends on perception as much as fact. These five pillars do not operate in isolation, they reinforce one another. Remove any one of them, the process weakens. Remove several, and even a successful outcome will fail the test of probity. At this point, it is important to draw a clear distinction between probity and integrity. Probity is often confused with integrity. They are related, but they are not the same. Integrity refers to the moral character of the individual. It is about honesty, consistency, and adherence to ethical values in one's personal conduct as a public official. Probity, by contrast, refers to the ethical quality of public decision-making processes. It is concerned not with intentions, but with how authority is exercised through fairness, transparency, impartiality, and proper management of discretion. The difference becomes clearer in practice. An official refuses bribe acts with integrity. An official who declares a conflict of interest steps aside from a decision and allows the process to proceed fairly, upholds probity. Both matter, but they operate at different levels. Integrity is personal, it resides in the individual. Probity is institutional, it resides in procedures, records, and accountability mechanisms. Integrity governs conduct. Probity governs the use of public power, and this distinction has real consequences. Integrity is internal and discretionary. Probity is visible, testable, and auditable. Public trust is built not on assumptions about personal virtue, but on confidence in the fair process. That is why good governance requires both. But it is probity that makes ethical authority credible in public life. Probity is not tested in easy decisions. It is tested when power meets pressure. In public service, certain decision spaces carry higher risk of probity failure, not because misconduct is inevitable, but because discretion is wide and consequences are significant. There are three such high-risk zones. First up is procurement and contracting. This is where public money meets private interest. Probity failures in procurement rarely occur at the end of the process. They usually begin at the start. When eligibility conditions are narrowly tailored, when information reaches some bidders before others, when evaluation criteria are vague or quietly adjusted, a process may appear compliant on paper and still be unfair in substance. Probity in procurement requires clear rules, equal access to information, early declaration of conflict of interest, and a documented trail of reasoning. Without these safeguards, even efficient projects lose legitimacy. The second high risk zone happens to be recruitment and screening. Recruitment is not only about filling positions, it's about fairness, dignity, and equal access to opportunity. Probity is tested when discretion outweighs stated criteria, informal influence replaces transparent assessment, or certain candidates are quietly excluded. Here, outcomes alone are not enough. Transparent criteria, consistent application of rules, and decisions that can be explained afterward are what protect trust in public appointments. The third high-risk zone happens to be decision making under influence. This is the most subtle zone. Public officials operate within networks, former colleagues, political expectations, professional relationships, and social obligations. Probity does not require isolation, it requires management. Conflicts of interest must be identified, declared, and handled through clear choices. Sometimes that means limiting involvement, sometimes stepping aside, and sometimes relinquishing the decision altogether. Because even the appearance of influence can erode public confidence. These zones reveal an important truth. Probity failures are not always about money, they're also about power, fairness, and dignity. They arise not from a single wrong act, but from processes that gradually stop being fair. That's why probity must be designed into decision making long before misconduct appears. In public service, probity does not survive on individual virtue alone. It is sustained or weakened by the governance ecosystem that surrounds decision making. Laws, institutions, procedures, and oversight mechanisms exist for one central purpose: to ensure that public power is exercised fairly, transparently, and accountably. This is why probity is best understood as a systemic value, not a personal one. At the institutional level, probity is safeguarded through clear rules, documented procedures, independent oversight, and enforceable accountability mechanisms. Audit bodies examine how decisions were taken, not just what decisions were made. Vigilance mechanisms track deviations from procedure. Transparency frameworks allow decisions to be questioned. Courts test whether authority was exercised lawfully and fairly. Together, these mechanisms do more than deter wrongdoing. They shape the conditions under which power is exercised. They limit arbitrariness, they discipline discretion, they make authority answerable. And this is why probity cannot be reduced to anti-corruption alone. Because corruption is not the only failure in public life. Opacity, unchecked discretion, and decisions that cannot be explained also erode trust. Probity, therefore, is not only about preventing abuse, it is about making governance legible so actions can be examined, decisions can be justified, and power can be answered for. When probity safeguards weaken, even well-intentioned decisions begin to look suspect. And when they function effectively, public institutions retain legitimacy even when outcomes are contested. This is why probity is inseparable from the architecture of governance itself. Strong laws and formal safeguards matter, but probity cannot be sustained by rules alone. An organization may have detailed procedures, multiple oversight bodies, and clear compliance requirements and still fail in practice. Because probity depends on how decisions are actually made inside organizations. It is reflected in how decisions are discussed, how disagreement is handled, and whether procedures are treated as safeguards or merely as paperwork. This is why scholars of public administration emphasize that probity must be embedded as organizational culture, not just enforced but normalized. In a healthy probity culture, officials do not ask, "How do I get this approved?" They ask, can this decision be justified openly, fairly, and on record? Leadership plays a decisive role here, not through speeches or slogans, but through example. When senior officials document reasons, declare conflicts of interest, and respect process even under pressure, they signal that probity is not optional. Training also matters, not as moral instruction but as practical guidance. How to recognize conflicts, how to record decisions, how to slow down when discretion expands. Probity fails not only when rules are broken, but when breaches are ignored. Silence, selective enforcement, and informal exceptions quietly teach organizations that process do not really matter. And once that lesson is learned, no code or manual can undo it. Probity is sustained when systems, leadership, and everyday practice reinforce one simple principle. In public service, how decisions are made is as important as what decisions are made. Public service is ultimately about power, the power to decide, to allocate, to permit, or restrict. Probity is what makes the exercise of that power legitimate. It does not ask whether decision was popular. It asks whether power was exercised fairly, transparently, and in a way that can be explained and defended. That is why probity is best understood as the ethics of process. Outcomes may be contested, trade-offs may be unavoidable, but when process is fair, authority remains credible. And without probity, even the right decision loses small authority. So long, happy learning.